Appearing via the Boardwalk Honda hotline, it's John McMullen at JF McMullen, and follow him on Twitter there. We got a lot of football at 4 today. Let's dive into it, John, where yesterday on the golf course we caught Commissioner Roger Goodell, and he was asked, about these preseason games, and he has said many times over the years, we have 2 games on our schedule that aren't very good, and we've known that for a long time. Are we getting closer to the end of the 4 preseason game schedule?
We are. I think it's been going in that direction for quite a bit of time. I think coaches don't like it. I think players don't like it. Obviously, fans don't like it. It's tough to make it seem like it matters. And I would argue, if anything, there's 4 games that don't matter, to be perfectly honest. And when you're talking about the new era of the NFL, the modern era, and you have to talk about safety, and you have to talk about the lack of preparation time, a lot of coaches think they get more accomplished in practice from being there every day. I don't disagree with them at all. So it's going to happen.
Well, that too. And what about, John, the influx of these joint practices where they can really control what they want to see against another team in a practice setting as opposed to having you out there in a game?
Yeah, coaches talk about that a lot because you can script what you want to do as opposed to hope you can work on something that comes across in the game, which generally probably isn't going to happen. And that goes back to the preparation, why they feel a scripted practice session essentially accomplishes more. So that's all thrown into the mix. And, for years, the NFL tried to, and they do this every time there's collective bargaining. They try to hold things and put them out there and use them as negotiating ploys and give something up. I put that in quotations, to get something in return. That's what they'll try to do with cutting down the preseason schedule. But either or, whether it's tied to the CBA, the next CBA or not, you gotta cut it down. It's terrible. It's terrible football. Nobody enjoys it. You got to pay regular prices if you're a fan. You got to go out. You got to park. You got to buy concessions. I don't know too many people that enjoy it, even though the NFL is what it is, as the most popular sport. It's a tough sell.
Yeah, and one thing is, too, that for Goodell to come out and basically say, we got 2 games that are just not a very good product, and we want to put the best product out there, it might be time to finally do that. We know the trade-off is the 18-game schedule. That's what they're looking for. But for him to basically trash his own product, say we're putting on a game out there that's not very good, and I know this is something they've been kind of saying for a little while, but at least it sounds like, hey, if we could get rid of those 2 games, we're going to try our best to do it. But he's almost saying now it's up to the players to do it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of, you turn it to the other side and see what they say and see how they approach it.
Right.
So that's a negotiating ploy as well. But it's tough to, stand up there. You always try, you're the commissioner of the league, obviously, so you always have to try to spin things as positively as possible. It's part of your job description. But preseason football, it's tough to spin. That's kind of what I said. If you look at, say, spring training baseball or something of that nature, even preseason basketball in the few games, they tend to take them to different arenas at times, discount the prices. You know what it is. It's just practice. One of the problems with the NFL is that they've always dressed this up as sort of the same as a regular season game. They bundle it with season ticket packages, each individual teams. They charge the same prices. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you went to, say, North Dakota with Carson Wentz as the Eagles and played there, maybe there would be some interest. But a lot of it is the way the NFL has handled it and tried to pretend that this is an actual NFL product, and that's part of the problem as well.
Yeah, I know. You take a look. You mentioned maybe traveling and playing these games so that other places get a chance to see like a preseason game. I remember being in college in West Virginia, and the Steelers would play a game in Morgantown. So that's a completely an audience that would appreciate seeing a game, even if it's not a regular season NFL game.
Yeah, and that's what I think they should do, things like that, if they want to continue the preseason. And that is a big if as well, because, as I said, I don't know anybody who wants to continue the preseason, and that includes the coaches. The coaches have kind of thrown in the towel since the current CBA, which was started in 2011. And I've talked about this with you a lot, and as far as preparation, as far as getting ready, they're frustrated by the lack of practice time. So the tipping point kind of came, and coaches realized, well, you know what? If we can't prepare to where we want to prepare at the level, it's best to keep everyone as healthy as possible. So that's kind of what has turned the preseason into a necessary evil, to something that's unwatchable, because they don't want guys getting injured.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them. So, and hey, that's the way they're going to go about it. So you might as well get rid of it.
We do have some questions coming in for John. If you have a football question, an Eagles question, an NFL question, 609-403-0973. We'll try to do more of that with our Football at 4 segment here in the offseason. So we'll throw some of these listener questions your way. But I want to start with, I thought Jordan Howard was interesting, him saying, hey, the Eagles are letting me do more than the Bears did, which, the Bears' offense is way different from the Eagles with Matt Nagy out there calling the plays. So it sounds like Jordan Howard feels like he is obviously that's why the Eagles targeted him, but a better fit here. And it's good to hear that the Eagles are utilizing him, and something the Bears didn't do.
Well, I don't know about that. Remember, the Bears, essentially through his first 3 years, I think he's the third leading rusher in the NFL. So he got plenty of touches, plenty of traffic.
But that was with a different coaching staff.
Yeah.
He's kind of referencing Matt Nagy, kind of
a little bit.
Yeah. Because he said, I feel like they're allowing me to do more, show my game off more, instead of just being a one-dimensional like Chicago had me.
Yeah, and he was a two-down back, and that's what he's getting at. The Eagles have used him and tried to get him involved as a pass catcher in the offseason. But I'll remind you, it's the offseason. It's the spring. And the second part of that is, trust me, if
he's only catching balls because I got no one else?
Yeah. If Tariq Cohen was here, he'd be one-dimensional. Let's put it that way. I mean, if you have a guy who can catch the football like the Bears do, well, that changes. And that's what the Eagles hope eventually, not that they're going to be the same type of player because Tariq is so small and explosive, but the Eagles are hoping that Miles Sanders can start out as that third down back, as somebody who can catch the ball out of the backfield and help you in that way. And if it's not Miles Sanders, perhaps Corey Clement gets healthy and he develops into that role. I don't think Jordan Howard is going to be a three-down back when September rolls around. Doug hasn't had that, and he's used the committee approach since he's gotten here. I think it continues, and I think ultimately when you get to September, he's going to be a two-down back again, just like he was in Chicago. And by the way, that's not necessarily a bad thing because I think he'll be the best two-down back the Eagles have had since Doug has been here. So I don't think that's a bad thing.
And the possibility that means that Miles Sanders is catching on and doing a good job because, the Eagles obviously have had a lot of questions between injuries and not really having anybody to be the main guy. By the way, Ajayi is still a free agent, right?
Yeah. Remember, he's coming off a torn ACL, so there's no hurry for him. He's not going to be ready to do any off-season work anyway if he were to sign anywhere. So he would just continue his rehab. So I do expect him to sign at some point. It could be sooner rather than later, but It could be into August, and because he's not going to be ready. So that's to be determined, but he'll be in the league next year.
All right. Adam Schefter tweeted this morning that there is no end in sight in the Eagles' holdout with Malcolm Jenkins. Now, you mentioned it's not a holdout. It's not mandatory that he's there, but no end in sight almost makes it sound like he's not planning on being there next week. And then coupled with, as you wrote at 973ESPN.com, the Eagles are kicking the tire on veteran safety Jonathan Cyprien, who plays the same position as Malcolm Jenkins. So let's read the tea leaves here.
Well, I wrote about this, and I think it has more than just more to do, the Cyprien kicking the tires on him, more to do than just Malcolm Jenkins. They're not the same type of player, so it's not like Malcolm's sitting at home with his knees shaking that the Eagles are thinking about moving on. I think a lot of it has to do with that hybrid position that is becoming in vogue in the NFL, and the Eagles don't necessarily have that guy at least full-time, even when Malcolm is here, because he's got to spend most of his time at safety, and Cyprien's a really, really big safety, 220, 225. And I think there's no – Jim Schwartz isn't sold that Camus, Grugier-Hill, or Nate Gary, or L.J. Fort can be that second nickel linebacker. So – if you can sort of bring in Cyprien, if he's healthy, and that's a big if. The guy's played 10 games over the last 2 years, tore his ACL last year. If you can find that hybrid player, I think that helps your defense, especially in the modern NFL. So that's part of it as well. And then the last part is, as this drags on, and I do not think Malcolm will be in for minicamp. I do think he'll miss that. Ultimately, I do believe there's an end in sight. But you do have to bring up that Malcolm has other interests. And if he does at some point decide, you know what, the Eagles aren't going to give me what I want, this is not worth it, he does have the ability to walk away. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't believe. I mean, maybe 1% chance. I've said consistently, and I still believe consistently, the Eagles will tweak his contract in August, and all will be well.
At JF McMullen, we'll read off a couple of listener questions in regard to this. John, with regards to safety, are the Eagles looking at Cyprien to replace Zendejo in order to recoup the conditional pick, or is this more indicative of Jenkins missing more time? These listeners are smart.
Compensatory pick madness.
Yes.
No. Understand the third safety has to play a lot of single high, and that's sort of what Rodney McLeod does when he's healthy, and Corey Graham did when he was here. And Malcolm was that moving part that would move all over the defense, would play in the box. Jonathan Cyprien is a box safety. The last thing you want is him in single high coverage. As I said, he's 225 pounds. He's not good in coverage. He's more of a hybrid player, as I mentioned. And I don't – there's a lot of things, and I've talked about this as well, with the compensatory pick formula. It is not set, and people don't understand that. Yes, could the Eagles cut Andrew Zendejo and, in theory, get back a fourth-round pick? That could happen, but if the 49ers cut Jordan Matthews, it might not happen. There's a lot of moving parts, and the Eagles aren't looking at this and saying, we need an extra fourth-round pick. If Zendejo falls flat on his face, yeah, they might cut him, but it won't be to get that fourth-round pick. They expect him to be the third safety. He's got a ton of experience playing single high in Minnesota. That's the type of player they want in that role. So only if he's post 30, he's coming off a significant injury that cut short last season. So if he doesn't succeed, it will be on the field. It will have nothing to do with that compensatory pick.
Okay, if you have a question for John, you can text it in, 609-403-0969. 0973. Zach Brown, he is a new linebacker from Washington. Really came out and, I don't want to say took a shot at Washington, but said this is a much better atmosphere. The locker room's a heck of a lot better than it was. No clicks is what I think he said.
Yeah, no clicks. Yeah, the Washington people weren't happy about that. But that's sort of Zach. He talks and he talks a lot of trash, and he likes to have fun. But I do think he's excited to be here. There is a difference. We know. We've talked about the dysfunction in Washington. He's not the first player to talk about it. He's not going to be the last. It starts at the top with Daniel Snyder and Bruce Allen. So it is what it is from the Redskins. Nobody should be surprised that people come out of that locker room and come into Philadelphia's locker room and see a big difference. I mean, that has been one of the strengths of this Eagles team since Doug Peterson got here. We all laughed at the time when Jeffrey Lurie coined the term emotional intelligence. Sound like corporate nonsense that Jeffrey often spouts, but turned out to be true. Doug knows how to deal with people, and he's put together a really good locker room, and it's one of the reasons Zach wanted to be here, and he's seen it already.
All right, let's get another listener question in here. John, will the Eagles go with any 2 tight end sets this year?
Well, yeah, of course. They go with 2 tight. The Eagles play 12 personnel, which is 2 tight ends, more than most teams, and they always have in this sort of modern era. But they're 11 personnel. That's their default setting on offense. It's the default setting on most teams. The Eagles will be about 65-35. The question is, should they be more than that because of the presence of Dallas Goedert? And that's a legitimate question, and it should be brought up. But remember, if Dallas Goedert plays, then probably Nelson Aguilar's got to sit. So you sort of have to weigh that. And the second part is Doug feels more comfortable as a play caller with 11 personnel, which is 3 receivers. So they play 12, which is their Tiger personnel, more than most teams already, and it should at least go up a tick.
All right. This listener wants to know, what is the deal with Josh Sweat, the defensive lineman there? And has anyone seen anything from wide receiver DeAndre Thompkins, the speedster from Penn State?
Well, Josh Sweat got hurt at the end of last season with a foot injury, shut down a little bit early, but he's back, and he's been working throughout OTAs, been taking the second-team reps at right defensive end behind Vinny Curry. But remember, Derek Barnett's not healthy yet, so that sort of knocks him down. The Eagles will probably keep 5 defensive ends. 4, which are Brandon Graham, Derek Barnett, Vinny Curry, and Sharif Miller is going to make the team because he's a draft pick. So then you have Josh Sweat and Joe Osman, who's got a lot of hype in the offseason. And they're 2 divergent players. If you look at them, I mean, Josh Sweat looks like an edge rusher in the NFL. If you went to Hollywood and told them to cast an edge rusher, they'd come back with Josh Sweat. And Joe's the opposite. Too short. He's too small, undrafted. But all he does is work hard. And you've heard Howie Roseman talk about him, Doug Peterson. So that's going to be one of the most interesting camp battles, I think. And I do think each player will have to make the team in August in training camp. And who was the second player?
He mentioned a wide receiver from Penn State. Is there a guy in camp, DeAndre Thompkins?
Yeah, DeAndre Thompkins is undrafted player out of Penn State. He's a return guy as well. And if he's going to make this team, he's going to make it as the punt returner. You don't want Deshaun Jackson returning punts every time, every week. You might use him in the fourth quarter of a big game if you need a big return, but you don't want him to be overused in that role, especially at this stage. So if a kid like Tompkins can do it, that could be his sort of path to a roster spot. Otherwise, from a receiver standpoint, undrafted guy like that, there's tremendous depth at receiver on this team. From that standpoint, he'd be working towards a practice squad berth.
All right, good stuff from John, of course, at JF McMullen. And check out his piece right now at 973ESPN.com, in which, we just saw the Sixers part ways with their medical team over there. And you wrote a little bit about that, right?
I said, oh, no.
Yes, two doctors from the Sixers medical staff party ways. And you wrote about messaging remaining the problem with the Eagles in these soft tissue injuries because Mac Hollins was back at practice, and that was a big hoopla the other day.
Well, he's not back at practice. He was on the field rehabbing.
Right. The first time we've seen him in a while.
Yeah, I did see him in the building last year at times. But that is one of the strangest stories because he was practicing last training camp. All of a sudden he got shut down. First, it was a groin injury. Then it was revealed he had sports hernia surgery in the offseason. And even with surgery, the fact that he's been out an entire year plus the offseason, and we get to OTAs and he's still not ready. And the Eagles claim there's no setbacks. There had to be a setback. There just had to be. It's more than meets the eye. And then that's where the messaging comes in. So everyone says, and, Miles Sanders is a perfect example. Everyone's upset. He's not ready to go. And they're saying this medical staff can't deal with hamstring injuries. You've heard some of the criticisms. It's not the medical staff. It's the messaging because the Eagles are not forthcoming with injury information. And by the way, you don't have to be in the offseason. That's not the point. But when you're so clandestine about these types of things, which are not important, let's be honest, Mac Hollins is the fifth receiver at best on this team. There's no reason to hold this close to the vest as sort of a state secret. You make the player look bad.
It almost seems,
make
John,
the doctors look bad.
It almost seems that they're going hockey on us. Like, oh, it's a lower body injury.
Yeah, well, and that's, we all know Miles has a hamstring injury, and Doug said lower body. I can't explain it. I really can't. Darren Sproles, and I brought him up in the piece as well. Anybody who's been around, Darren Sproles is legendary, not only around this team, around the entire NFL for his workout regimen. He is the strongest player, pound for pound, the Eagles have or had. He's not obviously here any longer. But there were some people, because he was out so long with what was described as a hamstring injury last year, that questioned Darren Sproles, of all people, that he wasn't working hard to get back. And again, none of these people have ever met Darren Sproles because he would be the last guy who's not working his butt off just because that's what he believes in. But, when Darren finally did come back, he confirmed to us he was dealing with much more than a hamstring. And that's where I bring up the point. When you do the things the Eagles are doing, you're making the player look bad, at least to people who don't understand how someone like Sproles works and tries to get back.
At JF McMullen, John McMullen, Football at 4, appearing via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. OTAs continue. We'll have more tomorrow right here on Football at 4. Thank you, pal.
Hey, thanks, Mike.
John McMullen, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.